Welcome to the Editorial, the podcast where we discuss all of the mistakes TLDR makes and why you're angry with us this week. I'm joined by Zach Michaelis, TLDR's editor-in-chief, as always.
Yeah, hello.
How many mistakes have we made? It's been like a couple of weeks since you last met with Ben to do one of these without me.
Yeah.
How many problematic videos have we had since then that need talking about?
So the last time I did an editorial was September the 8th.
Okay.
And that means about 2 weeks ago. And by my count, we have 5 videos that are probably worth mentioning. So, as regular editorial viewers will know, the way this works is we look at the like-dislike ratio on all of them.
Yeah.
And if it's below, like conspicuously low, like basically below like 97, below 96.
Yeah.
That normally means something's wrong with it. And so we mention, we talk about it here. And then obviously, like, if there's something else that we've done really, some glaring error.
Yeah. We'll
might
discuss
not
that
show
too.
up on the like-dislike ratio.
Yeah.
We still talk about that. But as I see it, I think they're basically 5 videos.
Which channels?
EU, UK, there's one on each of those.
Okay.
And then there's 3 globals.
Global loves a mistake.
Yeah, I know. We touched on lots of controversy there. We do a lot of border videos, all that sort of shenanigans. Yeah.
Go on then, let's start with EU.
Yeah, so go on. So the one video on that is Poland's plan to become a military superpower explained.
Yes.
Which has a like-dislike ratio of 96.6, which just actually isn't that low. But I still thought it was worth mentioning because I thought it was interesting that we got some pushback. So the pushback revolved around like 2 things. First was the viability of the plan. And the second was whether or not we were sort of like overstating it, like whether or not Poland could really be called a military superpower even if the plan happens. I'm actually sympathetic to both those points. I think we do discuss the viability of the plan later on in the video. But maybe we don't sufficiently stress the fact that this is in some part like an electoral gimmick. Like,
yes.
There's an election coming up in a couple of months' time, and the sort of incumbent Law and Justice Party is talking about all this big military spending because it's very, very popular in Poland, and the majority of polls are pretty keen on it.
Yeah.
And it's also worth saying that that is a 4% of GDP. Some people say 5% of GDP as well. That's a massive number. I don't have the figures to hand, but there's a reason that the rest of NATO struggles to spend 2% of GDP.
Sure.
And it's because it's classic guns or butter debate. Like, you can do it, obviously, but it does involve sacrifices. You only have so much government revenue. You only have so much productive capacity in the economy. Like, if you spend that much effort on ammunition and artillery and
coming out of somewhere else.
Yeah, it's coming out somewhere else. And that's why other countries struggle to do it. And whether or not that's actually feasible in Poland is ultimately like a political question, because it's about like how much like economic loss ordinary Poles are willing to bear. Do you see what I mean? Like if they're really happy to basically have their living standards suppressed for sort of ballooning military expenditure.
Yeah.
Who knows? I also think the other thing that was interesting about this is people push back about whether or not this is fair to call Poland a superpower.
Yeah.
And the reason I thought it was interesting is because, as we mentioned in the video, like quite a lot of other YouTubers have done videos on this topic because it's a big, it's an interesting story, especially in the context of like, most NATO members not spending enough on defence, and the sort of divisions within NATO about how hawkish we should be vis-a-vis Ukraine. Yeah. And Poland is obviously like the most hawkish in many respects, and so. This is often sort of like touted as an example, as a sort of like a European ideal. Like this is what we should all be aspiring to. We should all be as sort of like as actively pro-military, as actively sort of defence-driven as Poland.
Sure.
And what and so it's been covered on lots of other YouTube channels, and they've all used the term superpower.
Yeah.
I think even DW did a piece using the term superpower. And what I just think is interesting is that they're in their videos they don't get pushback on that term, and ours did. And in retrospect, I actually sort of agree with the commenters. I think that superpower is probably a bit of a grandiose term. I mean, we can justify it in some sense because you do have to make things a bit clicky, a bit clickbaity.
Sure, yeah.
But I probably do agree that it's a bit too grandiose a term,
Interesting that the audience are holding us to a
high standard
which
of
I like.
That's
what we're doing.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
like, it's interesting. Something for us to be aware of.
And I think it is worth mentioning that even if they do spend 4% of GDP, just because Poland's economy is a lot smaller than, let's say, like the UK, they're still spending half as much as the UK or France or Germany. Yeah. And that's, again, as we mentioned in the video, that's unflattering to Poland because Poland probably gets more bang for its buck, and Poland's probably investing in the sort of stuff that would actually defend Europe from a military invasion from Russia. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting is that how different audiences respond to that claim. Yeah. Some people are, on other channels, people are happy to have Poland described as superpower, but for us, there's a bit of pushback, and I actually sort of agree with the pushback. I think it is a bit grandiose.
Okay.
So that's a little apology. I think we probably did overstate that a little bit. So,
okay.
Yeah, first apology of the day. It's always good
One
to get
down.
off the chest.
Okay, UK, what's next?
The UK is on the tax system, which has 96.5.
Okay.
And well, this is actually to do with me and Tom is behind the camera, so no one can see him. Yeah, we're just waving to Tom. And I wrote a video on the tax system that I sent over to Tom, and we got a little bit of pushback in the video about it being a bit biased and a bit left wing.
Okay.
And they were basically saying that when we were describing the ideal tax system, the ideal tax system that we described was just sort of unfairly left wing. Okay. You know, and we were saying, oh, it's ideal to have some sort of redistributive tax, and it's ideal to have some sort of what's the right word? You know, like a tax where rich people pay more.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah? And I think so. I mean, there was basically a confusion between me and Tom, because when I wrote that, I deliberately used like quite ambiguous language, like we might want this, we might want that, to try and couch it in a bit of neutrality, to like be like, okay, we might want this. I'm not saying it's ideal. Yeah. And Tom almost fairly read that and thought, oh god, this is wordy. Like, let's just get to the point. And he cut out a couple of things. And I think that gave it a slightly like stronger vibe, you see what I mean, than maybe was originally intended. Sure. But I do see how people could have felt that it sort of was a bit left coded, and perhaps not like sufficiently delicate or sufficiently philosophical when we were describing what the ideal tax system would be. So that was another apology. That's two. Yeah, that's two. Yeah. So I think we could have done better there. So that's our bad. Global. Global. So global now. There's three on global. Yeah.
Big hitters.
I'm going to leave. So I'm going to go with the least controversial first. Okay. Egypt economic crisis, 96%. The main thing here is just a silly error from me. I said in January 2011, a month after anti-Gaddafi protests kicked off in Tunisia. Obviously, Gaddafi is in Libya, not Tunisia.
Yeah, wrong country.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's annoying because it comes so early in the video. And it's not actually that, it was just too quick and rushed from me. It's not actually that relevant to the actual content of the video. No. It's just about Egypt. But it is just nonetheless, silly, doesn't it? It's a really sloppy error. Yeah. So that's my bad. And I am sorry about that. I hope it didn't detract from the rest of the video. And then there was some pushback against the idea that Sisi was popular, which is we talk about in the video. We say that he used to be popular. He's the current president of Egypt, but he no longer is. Okay. Some people saying, oh no, he was never popular. He's an autocrat. No one ever liked him. I don't think that's true. It's not true. Sisi was popular to begin with. And sometimes the Western press would talk about Sisi mania. Wow. Back in the sort of like 2014. Like the Beatles. Yeah. So we made a mistake there, but I think the other charges are probably not fair. Okay. And so then we're now on to the two more controversial ones. Here we go. Let's get into it. So the two controversial ones. One of these is probably, I know what one of them is going to be. Which one are you saying? I'm India, today's one, right? India, Canada. That's like 90%, which is like 90%. Almost historic lows. If you ignore like Eminem World. Go Woke. Go Woke is, yeah. That one's like 76 or something. Yeah. India, Canada. Should we start with that? Go on, we've mentioned it now. It came out today. It came out today. Day of recording. So we did a video on the Canadian government's recent assertion, or specifically Trudeau's recent assertion, that there was quite credible evidence that the Indian state played a role in the assassination of someone that Trudeau described as a Canadian citizen. The video does have a really low like-dislike ratio. I think the first thing to say is that we have found that this is the case whenever we do content about India, especially when it's not pro-Modi or pro the Indian government. Yeah. So Roy did a video about could Modi lose in the next Indian election, and even though nothing in that video was factually incorrect, that got a like-dislike of like 89% off the bat, because I think a lot of Indian viewers basically just didn't like the suggestion that Modi might lose, even though I think we concluded in that video that no, he probably wouldn't lose. Yeah. And I think it's a similar thing here. I think that accounts for the vast majority of the like-dislike. It's some viewers not liking the suggestion that the Indian government has done something wrong. Okay. I think that's just not fair, unfortunately. I think that the Trudeau wouldn't come out and say something like this unless there was sufficient cause, like unless there was sufficient evidence that something had gone wrong. He wouldn't. There's been some sort of conspiratorial speculation that he's only saying this to play up to the Sikh electoral base. And that all plays into his sort of like coalition with the New Democratic Party, I think it's called. And I just don't think that's plausible. I don't think that Trudeau would risk upsetting one of the world's biggest countries and one of the most strategically significant countries just to, win over a like relatively small constituency in Canada. If not a politically powerful one, a relatively small one. So I don't think that's plausible. I think that there clearly is, there must be quite good intelligence that the Indian state had something to do with this. And if that's the case, then I think that is pretty serious. Trudeau did describe him as a Canadian citizen. It's yet to be confirmed, and we mentioned that in the video. The reporting on this is a bit contradictory. So obviously Trudeau described him as a Canadian citizen, but there is some evidence that he applied and failed to get citizenship in the early 2000s because he claimed that he was married to someone, and the Canadian Immigration Services basically said that this is a sort of like, it's a marriage of convenience. You're just trying to trick us into getting the equivalent of a green card. I don't know if it's called a green card. So, but if it is a Canadian citizen, like the fact that the Indian state might have played a role in the assassination, I mean, a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil, massive.
Of course.
You can't be doing that. And so, I don't think it's unfair to report on that. And I think that the fact that we're getting quite a lot of pushback for suggesting the Indian state might have something to do with it is just misplaced. There are some other more specific criticisms that some of the viewers made. For example, we didn't mention the fact that Trudeau has a political incentive to lie. I think, or not to lie, but to make a meal of this. We didn't mention it because for the reasons I just mentioned, I didn't articulate all of that in the video, but I just don't think it was all that relevant or instrumental to explaining the story. I think it's an interesting story in and of itself, the political power of the Sikh constituency in Canada, but I don't think it was really relevant to the story because I just don't think it's a plausible explanation for why Trudeau might lie about this. Some other viewers were saying that we didn't mention that we basically saying that, pointing out that the Khalistan movement is not supported by a majority of Sikhs, especially in India, and some of the territory claimed by Khalistan advocates includes bits of territory which are really not at all Sikh majority. Both these things are true. But when we were talking about the Khalistan movement, as I think we made clear at the beginning, we weren't trying to evaluate its prospects for success. We weren't trying to find out whether or not it was plausible or feasible that a Khalistan independence movement might actually get Khalistani independence. The answer is no. By the way, it's never going to happen. But we were just trying to describe or give a brief history of the movement to sort of explain where it came from and where it is today. And just to give a little bit of context to understand the story and why the accusations were leveled at the Indian government, what motivation they might have.
The video wasn't really about it. It was just necessary to understand why the Indian government would even, why it's even plausible to say they'd be involved.
The other thing that a lot of commenters mentioned is that we should have mentioned the Air India Flight 182, which was this terrorist plane hijacking carried out in 1985, so a year after the Golden Temple Operation Blue Star shenanigans by Sikh extremists. And I mean, that's a terrible event. I don't know how many people died. I think it was 300 and something.
Wow.
And it was the worst terror attack I think ever experienced in Canada, and I think the worst plane-based terror attack until 9/11. But again, I think that you can talk about that if you want to paint the Khalistani movement in a particular light, you know. And I think we could have mentioned that, but I don't think, again, it's actually helpful. I don't think it really has much explanatory value, apart from insofar as it explains to some extent why the movement petered out, because this obviously didn't look good internationally, and that lost some of its international sympathy or support. But I just, I don't think it was necessarily pertinent to the content of the video.
Sure.
So I don't actually think we necessarily did do anything wrong in that video. I think we could have mentioned the political dynamics within Canada, regarding the sort of Sikh political base and how that plays into the New Democratic Party and Trudeau's like parliamentary arithmetic. I think we perhaps could have mentioned the Air India flight. And also maybe the fact that Khalistan probably isn't going to happen anytime soon. It's not supported by most Sikhs. But I don't think those are like sufficiently grave oversights to merit an apology. Maybe an apology is like an aggregate for all of them. But I basically don't think we did very much wrong in that video. And if anyone can sort of like calmly articulate something I've missed there, if any of the viewers think that there's something that we did do wrong there that I'm just not acknowledging, please do let us know in the comments, and then we can address it next week. Of course. It does have a very low like-dislike ratio, and I would be interested to see what people think about that. And this might just be, ultimately this might just be an intuition thing. Some people might be thinking that in not mentioning those things, we are betraying our biases or something along those lines. And maybe I'm being blind to that. But my instinct is that that's not the case. So I don't know. But I would like to see it here if anyone has, a more specific criticism that can be addressed. Cool. We can talk about it next week.
Finally,
right?
That was fine. Yeah, absolutely. Interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so it was a bit of a rant, but
No, but interesting still. Yeah. Global. Final
the last one, Azerbaijan, Armenia. Is Azerbaijan about to invade Armenia? Which looks a little bit prescient today, because we're talking the day after Azerbaijan did invade. Well, it didn't invade Armenia, it invaded Nagorno-Karabakh. This is like a 95.5% like dislike ratio, which is pretty high. There are a couple of things. I think people basically mentioned two things. The first is easy to address, so I'll mention it quickly, is that some people were saying that the reason the EU isn't defending Armenia, let's say in the same way that they defend Ukraine, this is how it's articulated by the commenters, not me, is because the EU relies on Azerbaijan for gas. So last year, Ursula von der Leyen signed a sort of memorandum of understanding with Aliyev in Azerbaijan, saying they want to double Azerbaijani gas exports to the EU. This is just not true. Maybe it plays a bit of a role, but I think the overriding reason that the EU hasn't been keen to get involved in Armenia is, one, the geopolitics is just immensely complicated, but two, Nagorno-Karabakh is recognized by the vast majority of the international community as Azerbaijan. And so I think the reason that the EU and the West generally can't support Armenia too passionately is because it would look hypocritical vis-a-vis Ukraine. Because in Ukraine, part of the sort of justification for the strength of the support is that we're defending sort of UN norms, we're defending international borders, and we can't go, into Armenia to defend the opposite of that. To defend like what is fundamentally like a slightly, at least in international law, a sort of slightly baseless territorial claim. You see what I mean? That's the hypocrisy that we're scared of here. The other thing is people were saying that they thought we were biased towards Armenia. And I actually think that, in retrospect, I actually sort of think this is a little bit true. I think fundamentally, I don't make enough of the fact, it is mentioned in the video, and so it's not a massive error, but I don't think, in retrospect, I make enough of the fact that Nagorno-Karabakh is considered by most of the international community to be part of Azerbaijan. And I think that probably should be mentioned earlier in the video. And that also plays into other stuff that we talk about in the video. So like, for example, one of the reasons that the CSTO won't intervene, although there have also been reports of attacks actually within, also on the border between Azerbaijan and actual Armenia, is because Nagorno-Karabakh isn't Armenian territory. So why would the CSTO, why would Russia intervene for something
to defend something that isn't
Armenians?
And
so, and I just think that I could have made more of that at the start. I think that probably is something worth mentioning. I think the video is nonetheless pretty good. It's a complicated topic. And the other thing is that it's very hard to find. There's one of those things where, in part because it's not English language, but it's very hard to find like, what's the right word? What's the word for when you can like verify? So verifiable reports, especially in the moment. Because like, for example, we've done a video on this today. And it's all kicking off, and you see different numbers all over the place about like sort of casualties and where it's happening, and all that sort of thing. So in some sense, there's a bit of like ambiguity necessarily in there. But I do take the point that I think we should have made more of the fact that Nagorno-Karabakh is Azerbaijan territory under international law. So that is an apology. I'm sorry about that. I think we could have done better there.
Fair enough.
There we go.
That's everything.
Yeah, I think that is everything.
5 videos. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So that's our analysis. If you have any thoughts or any additional comments or criticisms, obviously comment them on YouTube or email us at hello@tldrnews.co.uk, and we will maybe address them next time.
Yeah.
We will be back. Actually, I won't be back, so I won't be here in 2 weeks. But Zach will be back in 2 weeks with someone else to discuss the mistakes we make between now and then, which I'm sure will be numerous. We'll see you then.